when we look at consumer education, I always like starting with questions because it's presumptuous to make any assumptions. And also, by the questions they ask, it will probably lead us to the best direction of what somebody might be most interested in.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development.
We're back for our final episode with Amy from Zoom Foods. Amy, thanks again for coming in. You want to give everybody one quick last recap of what you guys do?
Sure. We sell tahini and tahini products.
Perfect. So we're going to talk about consumer education, which is a big piece of what you guys do. Can you just, I guess, start by defining what consumer education is to you?
Oh my God, that's a great question. Consumer education is, to me, teaching people what your product is, very simply, how they can use it, why they should care about it, really. But I think at its core, it's assuming with good reason and in good faith that they don't know what you do at all. And to assume that they do know what I do or what I sell or what tahini is very presumptuous, because as I've learned, most people don't. And it's the greatest gift to me to be able to teach somebody what tahini is, why it's great, and all the ways that they can use it. So I think for me, consumer education is also just relationship building. It's an act of sharing.
Yeah, and one of the first things you guys were doing when you first brought the product in was really one of the first people to introduce tahini to the consumer market in the States. What was your education process? How did you frame it to people who had no idea what it was when there really was no reference?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we found in our market research were a few things. So the first things we found was that most people had no idea what tahini was. If they did, you could only find it on the bottom shelf of the international aisle, and they couldn't name the brand that they had purchased. And lastly, they only use it to make hummus, maybe a tahini sauce or salad dressing. And then they probably threw the jar or the can away 6 months later when they found it in the back of their pantry or the back of their fridge. So that showed us where the opportunities were. One was to get tahini out of the international aisle, and B was to give it a brand name that Americans could relate to and would be easy to, recall and share about. Also, just the idea of bringing something of high quality was really important to us. So when we look at consumer education, I start with a very basic question. For the past 12 years, whether I was at a farmer's market or standing in a grocery store, or quite frankly, even doing a podcast, which is this, are you familiar with tahini? Are you?
I mean, my wife's used it to make hummus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with it.
Exactly. And so that's great. So when somebody tells me I've used it to make hummus or my wife uses it to make hummus, now I know that I can maybe skip a couple steps and tell you why our tahini is better for making hummus. But for somebody like you, I start from the beginning, which is simply describing that tahini is an ingredient made from 100% roasted and pressed sesame seeds. I liked your question about what context you put it in, because the next thing I share is that it's thicker than olive oil and thinner than peanut butter, but can be used for both in savory and sweet recipes. So I try to frame it to things that they're already familiar with, and also prompt them on its versatility, because that's one of the most endearing and exciting things about tahini. So that's a great question.
Yeah, do you like to frame it as a flavor enhancer or a health thing? Do you change that up depending on the audience?
That's been one of our biggest challenges, is figuring that out, because how do you describe what an ingredient is? It adds flavor, but it doesn't overpower anything. So the flavor is very subtle. It adds texture. It typically adds creaminess to dishes, especially sauces or salad dressings. It adds health benefits like protein, calcium, and iron. And so exactly like you suggested, depending on what people seem to be interested in or where I find that the hook kind of brought them into. If it was brownies, then I'm going to talk about the nuttle sesame notes and nuttiness that it adds to the brownies. If it's for somebody that is looking for a substitute for mayonnaise, then I'll probably talk about the health benefits, but that it's a similar texture, when you prepare it. So it does depend who we're talking to.
Yeah. So what was your guys' process to kind of figure out what the most important points were? Did you guys get feedback from people or do some research?
We I can't tell you how many farmers markets and grocery stores I demoed in the first 2-3 years of the company. And so I saw what worked for people, and I saw when people just kind of eyes glassed over and didn't work. So it was really just a test and restructure. It was just live and really authentic and in-person experiences that helped us shape it. Going back to our prior video, when we were looking to start hiring people, my sisters would always joke, like, we need a hologram of Amy. Like, if Amy's like the best person that can sell this. So I did have to take these ideas out of my head and share them with the salesperson. But like anything, you can only share so much. People have to experience these conversations for themselves and understand what works for who. But that is why I like starting with a question. That even came up in terms of sales strategy. I always like starting with questions because it's presumptuous to make any assumptions. And also, by the questions they ask, it will probably lead us to the best direction of what somebody might be most interested in.
Were your efforts mostly in-person conversations, or did you branch into like digital marketing or print marketing, anything like that?
We did a lot of organic social media. And so anything, we made recipes, we'd make that into a recipe card, we'd hand those out in person. And those pictures would also end up on our social media, and the recipe is on our website, So it was a pretty 360 commitment to consumer education. That ebbed and flowed over the years. I mean, there were years where we felt like we couldn't prove a value on investing into recipe development and photography and content creation. So we pared that back. And there were years where we felt like we needed a lot more content, and we invested really heavily in that. That was kind of dependent on what the strategy was for the company at that time. But I would say that we always wanted to yield the most that we could for an investment that we made. So if we made a recipe, or we paid somebody to make a recipe and to photograph that recipe, then we wanted to get as much use out of that as we possibly could.
So what are like the KPIs for tracking success in consumer education? That's got to be
impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brand awareness too. We talk about it all the time in our like small little marketing department. I would say word of mouth. I recently saw a post about this. If you know people are talking about you, then you know that it's working, And so even mostly it's anecdotally. We'll have people write in and say, oh, I heard about tahini from a friend, or I heard about Zoom from a friend. So that kind of validates it. We might go back to a grocery store, and the clerk there will say, oh, I saw somebody pick up your tahini and they said that they got a recipe card here a couple months ago. Those kind of anecdotal notes helped a lot over time in helping us feel confident and like having some sort of success with what we were putting our efforts into. But it's very difficult to prove the return of brand marketing. It's why, as we've gotten bigger, especially in retail, we've focused more of our marketing resources on at the shelf or close to purchase marketing, as opposed to top of the funnel, higher esoteric brand marketing. But it does work. It's hard to prove when it does, and it's easy to prove when it doesn't.
How does that work with getting access to put like a display in a store or something? Like here's a special placard that goes underneath your thing at Whole Foods. Like, what's the process to do that? It
depends on the store. Some stores have a marketing department that decides what they think will add value to their customers' experiences. At somewhere like Whole Foods, it's typically around local providers. So they want to highlight local businesses because they know their customers like that. Or minority-owned businesses, like being a certified women-owned business. We've had highlights for that. So it depends on the store and what their marketing strategy is. I would say we've mostly been able to participate in marketing efforts like that without paying for them. The other way is to pay for it, but through a certified women-owned business, a certification that we have as a women-owned business.
You mentioned using social media to get recipe ideas out and things like that. What steps did you take to grow your social media presence?
Early on, we did a lot of outreach to influencers, and this was back in 2012, 2013, where nobody was really an influencer yet. And people were willing to just trade a post for products back then. And we did that a lot. I remember talking to somebody in the early days, and they told us to expect to sample 10% of our inventory, in the early days. And I always kind of took that to heart. And so we have always had a huge sampling budget. We'll send tahini to anybody, anytime. It's worth it. If they're interested in receiving a sample, then it's worth it for us to send it to them. And we would have very simple, authentic conversations with these people on Instagram saying, we'd love for you to try our tahini. If you put it in a post, great. If not, no worries. Just let us know what you think about it. That helped establish some really long, deep-seated relationships, which have been great. Some of these people have grown to have tremendous success on social media, and we couldn't even afford to pay them for a post now, but they've become affiliates of ours over the years. And when they link to Amazon, they get a % of that Amazon sale. A lot of times back in the day, this was totally kosher. I don't think it's as well received now, but we would just look for posts with hashtag tahini and repost them. And of course, give credit to the person that posted it originally. So we're really just trying to curate as much tahini content as possible. We've worked on and off with influencer strategies more recently, like more concerted ones where we're paying somebody to review us and hoping that brings us more followers. But admittedly, to your question about like how do you prove if brand marketing works, I would say one of our deepest data points is the fact that we don't see a lot of direct return on revenue from social media. Somebody with 1 million followers can post about Zoom, and we don't see an immediate bump, for instance, on Amazon or on our website. However, when we were mentioned in credible media like Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, New York Times food section, we would see an immediate bump on our website or on Amazon. So I think that there's something to the actual persuasion of influencers on social media, where I know me as a consumer, you're oversaturated. So when somebody recommends something, I don't think it's as strong of a credible recommendation as other types of media sources.
Yeah, it's funny. We're in it's like a seesaw right now where it's like, oh, it has to be all influencer style, organic. That's what's working. Once that's so oversaturated, it tips back to like, no, give me a polished professional introduction and then I can be inspired by that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's funny to see for you guys, it works the other way where like a more formal magazine type of placement is more beneficial than someone just on their couch. Hey guys, I got my suit over here. It's amazing.
Yeah. We have seesawed the same way as you. We're like, we would never put an ugly picture on Instagram. And there were some years where UGC was all the rage. And I could put like the slop of eggs and tahini mess on my plate. And that was well received. So we've gone through that same seesaw in terms of content as you.
And you could be hitting a different market too with a different shopping mentalities too. I guess because they're an older generation, maybe they're more likely to just go right out to the store and buy something. Have you noticed any like specific demographics that really resonate with your brand?
Yeah, this took a long time to figure out. We have a few target demographics, but our best demographic, our customer profile, is a woman named Barbara. She's in her late 60s, and she likes to feel connected to food and culture by following the best restaurants and going out to eat and buying those cookbooks. But mostly she likes to feel valued and connected by being a resource of new information. So she takes a lot of pride with sharing with her friends that she heard about a new tahini from a cookbook, or most notably buys a tahini for her daughter or daughter-in-law because it makes her feel in the know and connected. And it took us a while to realize that Barbara was our core demographic, not Emily, who was like in her late 20s. Because you're right, like, and that probably is a perfect example over why we do better on the New York Times, article than on social media, because Emily's busy and doesn't have as much disposable income, and she's probably spending it at the restaurants that we sell to, whereas Barbara has a lot more time on her hands, can go the extra 5 seconds or 5 minutes that it takes to purchase it on Amazon or in the grocery store, and, has that disposable income to buy 3 jars of tahini at once because she wants to share it with her friends. So it took us a long time to understand the demographics of who was purchasing us. And now that we've been able to refine our brand marketing and consumer education to focus more on the Barbaras of the world, and less on the people that actually weren't yielding as much for us.
Does the voice of your consumer education shift when you're talking to a consumer versus a chef versus a distributor?
It should, but it doesn't. I mean, we have one brand manager, and we have me, and I just am who I am. And I talk the same way here that I do when I'm doing a cooking demo for 40, 60-year-olds at my local JCC. And we talk the same way when we're talking to a retail buyer, but I think a more sophisticated brand might. Or we'll see. I talk about that a lot as it relates to the psychology behind the people that are our core customers. Like, what drives Barbara is different than what drives Emily. Emily is, she's more trying to, we worked with a marketing professional to hone this in, but she's more trying to avoid mistakes. Like, she wants to make the best hummus because it would make her feel bad to have not made a good hummus. Whereas Barbara, it's a much more positive experience. She wants to buy the tahini because it just makes her feel good and really connected to culture. So I don't think we do a good job changing our voice to Emily, because maybe to Emily we should be pointing out how we're helping her to avoid the things that she doesn't want to do. And to Barbara, we can put a different psychological spin on our messaging, but we are not that refined in our messaging at this point.
What kind of research did you do to come up with these profiles and demographics? How did you figure that out?
We use the profiles, or what we could discern from our Amazon customers, which is not a lot of info. We've had more info in the past, Amazon's really tightened up what they share with brands now, but we had more in the past. We had our website. So as challenging as the website sales were, it does add a lot of value to have that direct connection to your customer. And then I don't know how our marketing consultant did it. It's this wonderful woman named Isabel. I think at this point, you can use anything with AI. You could probably describe somebody in their 60s and where they live and what type of community things they're involved with, and ask AI to spit you back what magazines they read, what websites they find credible, what drives them psychologically. And I have a feeling all of that now is probably even easier to ascertain.
So for smaller brands who are kind of still figuring out their consumer education voice and strategy, what would you say is some of the most important things for them to figure out when they're starting that?
I think the most important thing is just to figure out what feels most real and natural to you. We went through a phase where we tried to create a brand voice, and then we needed to make sure that the people that were participating as the brand were in it, and it was not authentic and it was difficult to do. And we were they needed to be really micromanaged and nitpicked. Why'd you say that instead of saying this, or whatever it was? And it just didn't work for our company culture or our brand identity. So I would just suggest that you figure out what's most authentic to you and to your product, and then find people. If you can't, for instance, do your own social media, I don't want to be the one on our Instagram, then find somebody that just is naturally like that. Not that you have to teach them how to talk like Zoom, that they naturally talk like Zoom. There's enough people out there where you can find the people that are good at the roles and responsibilities of a job and fit into your personality very easily. The other thing that's helped us to do that is we switched to working with a operating system called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And once we started to screen people for their values as part of our onboarding process, then we found not that you want to just hire people who are like you and who look like you or who act like you 100%, but there are shared values that people have that make working together easier. And when we brought those values to the forefront of the organization, we found A, we were able to let people go that didn't fit in, and B, all of us naturally can fit into a Zoom brand and identity because we all kind of believe similar things, and have similar aspirations and prioritize things like being proactive. And we care about quality work, and we care about being collaborative. And when people are like that intrinsically, then it tends to express itself across all arrays of how they work within the organization.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, Amy, thanks again so much for coming on. It's been awesome getting to hear about you and Zoom and all the stuff you guys are doing. Very thankful for your knowledge share. So anything you want to share about the company or yourself? Anything, events coming up or anything like that?
Great question. No, we're pretty focused on industry events, but we're very excited to be expanding our distribution, as you mentioned in our last video. So you can find Zoom in over 4,500 stores now. Our store finder on our website, zoomfoods.com, is the best way to do that. Where, of course, can purchase us on Amazon, on Thrive Market, Misfit Market. This was really fun to catch up with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, support local, Zoom Foods.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.